We are recording.
Great. Thank you, everybody, for being patient as I was having some computer updates happening and then trying to get on and figure out my camera. So thank you. Yeah, let's get started. Evan, do we start with a call to a roll call? Perfect. Well, let's get that started then.
If you want to, if you want to call the meeting to order real quick,
Let's call the meeting to
say the
order.
at 1:06 p.m. just for the record, and I'm happy, Chair, to do the roll call. Chair Ambrose,
Present.
Trustee Jackson,
Present.
Trustee Romero,
Present.
and Trustee Vu.
Here.
And we have quorum, Chair.
Perfect. Thank you, Evan. Wow, what's on our agenda, China? There's been so much going on politically. I appreciate President Peters, all of the communication you are sending out via emails with the executive orders and how that may or may not affect us, what our thought process is moving forward, and that we're monitoring the situation. I think it's sent a lot of us in the nonprofit world and in higher education through a tailspin, right? And I'm glad that there's a freeze, but we'll see what's there to come with funding sources and whatnot, and we'll navigate it as they come up. Does anybody want to express or share any thoughts, feelings, sentiments? It's heavy conversation, so I want to make sure that I'm being sensitive to those that would like to chat about this further. If anybody else would like to chat about it.
Chair Ambrose, if I can real quick, I just want to do a couple housekeeping announcements before we get too far into the conversation. First is we are now under the requirements to record and post all of our meetings. So this will be the first of our meetings that we will be posting online. And I'll work with HR to make sure that we get a transcript correctly for captionings before we get it posted, but it will be posted. So I want to, as a reminder to our committee, that these from now on will be recorded and posted on the website in compliance with state law. And that might impact the conversation. So just wanted to make sure that for housekeeping that we remind our trustees that.
Perfect. Thanks, Evan.
And then, sorry, one more thing, because it's a subcommittee, we do not allow for public comment in the subcommittee meetings. If folks would like to public comment, I invite them to come to our board meeting in February. We will have 2 open comment periods, one in the beginning of the Wednesday meeting, and one in the end. And those dates are already on our website at www.wou.edu/board. All right, back to you, Chair.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. With that being said, yes, everything is being recorded, so I do appreciate that with the changes. So yeah, please do take that into account as you're making your comments or statements that we are. And I know a lot of the time we banter with one another, so just be cognizant of that. Moving on to the consent agenda and the approval of the October 17th minutes. Does anybody have any questions? And if not, can I go ahead, Paige?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just noticed, I don't think it's a huge deal, but I'm listed under both present and excused
Oop.
In the minutes. And I feel like I wish I had that power, but I was definitely not in 2 places at once.
I will fix that. I had in my notes, yeah, I'll fix that. Easy fix.
Thank you. With that fix, have folks have a chance to read them? And if so, can I entertain a motion? Vivian?
Viviana,
Viviana, sorry.
you're all good. I, Viviana Romero, move to approve the meeting minutes from the previous meeting.
I
So we have-
second the motion.
Perfect. So we have a first and a second. Do we do the call from there, Evan?
You, Chair, ask if there's any discussion on the motion.
Any other further discussion?
Mhm.
Hearing
And
none.
We're going to want to do roll, as we talked about in our pre-meeting, we want to do a roll call vote.
Great.
All right, so Chair Ambrose,
Aye.
Trustee Jackson,
Aye.
Trustee Romero,
Aye.
and Trustee Vu.
Aye.
Motion passes. All right.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that. Moving on in the agenda, reports and discussion items. The Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion update, Dominique.
Hello, everyone. Hopefully you had time to check out my relatively short, though I look and it's 8 pages, so how short does that feel, report on the DEI office. It felt short at the time, just because when I submitted this, in time for it to go in the docket, so much was still left to happen before this meeting that it felt as if I was oh my gosh, it seems so little. But obviously a lot has occurred since our last Board of Trustees meeting in November. I won't go through the entire report with you all in hopes that you have time either to read it as time goes on. But I will share a couple of things as was shared at the beginning. We have been obviously paying attention very closely to what's happening, as happens with every change in federal administration. There's always changes and there's always things that we need to figure out and navigate. And so we are definitely keeping our eyes, ears, all things out to begin to understand and unpack how those changes may affect our office, this university, et cetera. And we are remaining diligent in that. And for us at this time, we are moving forward as we are. So some of the things that you all know that we've been working on I want to kind of highlight just a couple of more, I guess, accomplishments that have happened and call attention to that. We're very excited, and this is part of the Equity Assessment Action Plan as well, but we're very excited about having, kind of a first draft of an accessibility policy for the university. We've been working with kind of an informal open access group that became this policy development group, which was very exciting, and a lot of work has gone into that initial draft and continues to be done. And then in addition to that, we're really excited for our, what does LTAC stand for? Learning technology? What's the L? Anyway, LTAC, one of our committees here, is really taking the lead on a digital accessibility policy, which is very exciting for us. And then we're, of course, working together on what all of that means. So basically, we're really excited about some of the accessibility work that we have ahead of us. We're also excited because we updated our map of restrooms. Annabelle from my office helped update that in partnership with Disability Services and other folks across campus. We had some outdated maps and things, and so we wanted to make sure we were getting folks on our campus community to know where facilities and things were for them. So we were excited to update that kind of thing. Additionally, we have been excited about some of the work we're doing around our HSI efforts. As we noted in November and is still true, we are well on our way to maintaining our over 25% undergraduate students, and so we feel very confident in that. And one of the new things that Christian, our assistant director, has been working on is developing a community-based kind of advisory group. So we're excited to continue to figure out, the best way to serve our students and really partner even more with outside entities to make sure we're doing the best we can here on campus for our community. So those are just a couple of highlights. We also, of course, have continued work around the equity assessment. As you all know, there's this, and we can obviously we'll go into the climate survey separately, but the equity assessment has been going on since November 2022, so over 2 years now, and we have been working through an action plan for quite some time, really in a focused way over the last year, and some really great things have continued to come out of that. And so we've been really excited about that work. And you all will receive new updates specifically to that equity assessment action plan prior to the next board meeting. There's 11 accountability leaders and then some partners in that, like Paige herself, and Shell Batchelor and some folks that work with the accountability leaders to make some updates on that. So we'll have new updates for you ahead of the next board meeting. They'll be due next week to us. In addition to that, I want to highlight that we have continued some work around our Freedom of Expression website. We have continued to bring together, again, another kind of group that we called together quite informally that has managed to do some great work. And so our Freedom of Expression website has continued to be updated, and some of our faculty are leading work around the academic freedom portion of that, and in light of some new information that's been coming up at the federal level as well, making sure that we're staying up to date and keeping folks in the know. And then we also have updated our support resources and website for our DACA and undocumented students. And so that's something that's been developing. It's not in, you won't see that reflected in the report because it, we hadn't finished that yet. And everything, including freedom of expression and all of our support resources, are kind of these living, breathing websites and documents that change with time and as we get more and more information. So know that you'll continue to kind of get updates around that kind of thing. And so we've been very excited about that work. One of the last things I'll highlight from this particular report, again, that happened since I submitted this report, is we did offer a first generation professional development opportunity last Friday, which was supported through student success and advising, was supported through our TRIO programs, was supported through multicultural student services and programs. And so we had that session last Friday, and we also had our first ever Tri Alpha induction ceremony. And Tri Alpha, for those who may not know, is a first generation student honor society. And we inducted 39 students into that society for our first cohort of students. I can't remember, maybe like 20-ish were actually in person. It was really wonderful. 6 of our students shared on a panel, and just, I can never, I'm impressed by our students every time. And I just like, I always, when you go to a student panel and they choose to share some of who they are with you, it always reinvigorates, our purpose and our mission, our vision and our values. And so we were very excited about that engagement last Friday. And so we've been doing some really great work, and we're very excited about everything. And I welcome any questions in regard to anything from the DEI report that y'all may have read or anything that I've shared so far today.
Thank you, Dominique. Does anybody have any questions? Viviana?
Yeah. So this is not necessarily related to the report. So if this is a conversation for another time, I'm happy for that. But I've been doing some research. Obviously, Oregon is a sanctuary state, and I've heard that Portland State University is a sanctuary campus. Is there any way we could look into making Western a sanctuary campus? Or if it already is and I'm just unaware?
Yes, so we thank you for the question, and we do support all Oregon sanctuary, like the Oregon Sanctuary Promise, and so that is part of our university culture and structure. And so so we do have we've sent out just a little bit of messaging in regard to that, but we do comply with Oregon state law in regard to the expectations around engagement. And so we have developed some work about, if different scenarios occur on our campus community, working with our campus public safety and our general counsel to ensure that we're doing the best we can to ensure all, individuals within our community are safe within our community. So thank you for the question. I appreciate that. And I will, yeah, that's it. I always have like, how many more things can I share? But that's good.
Any other questions?
I don't really have a question, but if it's okay with you, I could sort of chime in a little bit. Just basically to say that obviously this is a uncertain and tumultuous time for lots of people based on federal changes through executive orders, including, our own Office of DEI. So Dominique has been following things and working very hard to keep us all informed. So it's really good. We want our students and our community to be informed and to know where we stand on things. Some of the times we don't have clarity right away. A good example was the freezing of federal funds and what that would mean for us. And we can talk more about that if you have questions. but it's, you know, it's something that even lots of legal counsels don't really understand, you know, what's going to hold up in court, what's being challenged, how things will move forward. And there will be times when Oregon law will come up against changed federal law, affirmative action, for example, or equal opportunity. If those things are ended by executive order and Oregon still has laws that ask for steps to fulfill those actions, then we'll have to have our own governor and attorney general sort that out for us. So I like to tell people it is stressful. We are uncertain, but we're going to go sort of slowly and try to make the best decisions we can and get the best information we can.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, President Peters. And Dominique, all I want to say is I think it's awesome that, you know, a lot of the times our timelines didn't match up with all of these planning phases, but I love how we're tying it all back into our strategic plan and we're trying to meet those intentions. And so I think you've done a great job in trying to marry everything and bring it all together. So I'm keeping us on that track and how there's opportunity there. So thank you for that. Before moving on to the next agenda item, is there any other discussion, questions, thoughts? All righty, let's go to our climate survey. So I was able to be present for our climate survey findings and sharing of that. I think Dr. West did a very, very good job. It took me by surprise that it's been 3 years that we've been engaged with her on this work, and we finally get the phase 4, the final report now, right? And so Dominique, I'm going to turn it over to you. I honestly saw the presentation was there, but every time I look at it, I find something new. And so I'm still trying to digest this and what it means. What I did appreciate about Dr. West is that during the presentation, she was able to describe the nuances and differences when it comes to data collection. I'm not a big data geeking out. So hearing those and the questions in the room was super helpful. And so I'm hoping that as we move through and to try to digest these findings, that maybe you can help us through some of that translating and we think this, but then don't forget it might match up somewhere else, right? So Dominique, I'll turn it over to you and you could take it from there.
Yes, so I will provide just a tiny bit of context in case anyone is not fully in the know, because it has been. We started looking for an equity assessment consultant minutes after I started in June 2022. So as long as I have been here, we have been engaging in this really great work and this really great effort. And to see it, you know, kind of begin to come to this quote unquote initial culmination is incredibly exciting. And it's also kind of just the start of the next piece, right? So, you know, our time with Dr. West begins to come to an end right now, but then we get to choose how do we continue to navigate through this and how do we continue to move some of these great suggestions and some of this great work forward. So it's a really exciting time. So I will share that you know, this is, as Jerry mentioned, this is phase 4. So if you recall, more than 800 individuals in our community engaged in this climate survey. Faculty, staff, students. Definitely, there was a higher population of employees that engaged in the survey. However, the number of students was kind of slightly higher than anticipated based on what we know from data in previous survey times. So the numbers with students were, you know, average to what we see or a little bit above average to what our institutional research office had said that, you know, they kind of expected to be reflective. So we always want more numbers, but we feel okay about where we are. So before we kind of talk maybe and allow folks to talk through data and stuff, I actually want to start a little bit with what's going to come next. So as you all know, this is phase 4. After phase 1 and then into phase 2 and 3, we developed an equity assessment action plan. So you all as the board get updates in that equity assessment action plan every quarter. And so that plan will continue. However, we will develop a new equity assessment team we've already put out a call for those folks to like nominate, self-nominate, that kind of thing by February 10th. And we will then go back 2 phases 1 through 3. We will go back to this climate survey data. We will kind of look at this as a culmination of activities to then be able to decide, maybe we will make some recommendations to potentially update the action plan, potentially change things, maybe make some different recommendations or new or different ones. And really the intention is, now that we have a fully developed strategic plan that was not there when we first developed the action plan, to really tie everything directly back into our mission, vision, and goals from our strategic plan. So that's going to be where we move forward. At this point, you all have seen, or if you were able to attend the presentation, you've seen the presentation from Dr. West. She noticed a couple of areas that she wanted to edit, so she's making those edits for us, and I should have that to send out to everyone on campus very soon. She also wanted to make a couple of edits to her final report. So she's going to be sending me that information, and then as promised, we'll be sending that to all of the university community, and it'll also be available in the portal that we utilize. So anyone with a WOU login, all of you will have access to that information. So that will also help to, Jerry, what you said, really help to kind of contextualize, because obviously in her presentation, it was kind of high level summarizing some things, whereas in the report, you get to kind of take a deeper dive, see more examples of things, hear more specific voices, that kind of thing. So it will help to kind of give you a little bit more. Same with like the recommendations. She had some key recommendations that she puts into both the university context, as well as even in some cases, a national context for us to consider. So anyway, so lots of good work to come. This is kind of the first step of that, right, is getting this initial presentation and information. And if there's anything specific that you all would like to engage around, for those of you who are able to, I'd love to hear, like, Viviana, your initial takes from your ability to attend and things like that. Similar to what Jerry said, I look at this, multiple times now, and I see new things every time. I think what I will share for sure is some of the initial immediate conversation has definitely been around basic needs, has definitely been around like what that truly looks like. And when Dr. West was here, I'll also share this. She did present to our university community first. Then we did have a small dinner in which we kind of talked through some of the things. She met with our senior leadership team. And then she also had a meeting, like a lunch with students yesterday. So she also just kind of had informal conversation and discussion with students yesterday. And she will also share a few of those notes with me as well. So there's this was a very great package of a couple of days in which we had, a lot of opportunities to think through and engage in some of this. And that basic needs piece really kept being a through line, right? Like it came up with the students, it came up with senior leadership, like it's this continuity. It's one of the things, follow-up questions to when she was presenting. And really what are even basic needs? Because we kind of asked some traditional questions, right, in regard to food insecurity, housing insecurity, those kinds of things. But then what are also some other areas, right? So like a student reflecting on not being able to afford gas if they're a commuter student, those kinds of things that weren't necessarily directly asked, but we've been able to kind of begin to contextualize a little bit more. And then also a really good discussion too on areas like basic needs of like, how are we truly addressing that, right? So there was some discussion about, it's really great and people appreciate our food pantry. Is it open at the hours that we need it to be open, right? Similar to dining, is that meeting the needs? How could we shift or do some things maybe slightly differently? And then also, when we say we want to help meet the basic needs of our students, what does that truly mean, right? And like, what is truly like, are we trying to solve problems, help problems, like what is, and as we know, we cannot do all things for all people. So what are our focus areas and priorities and things like that? And so that's some of the conversation I felt like that came up again and again over the 2 days that Dr. West was in our community. And I think is really salient to all of us as we try to think about, how do we expect students to go to class if they're not also having, food, right? How do we expect students to go to class if they don't have a bed to sleep in? And so really thinking through what our expectations and what is the environment that we're trying to set up. And we cannot solve all things. So what is our focus, And so it's been really interesting to engage in those types of conversations. And that was definitely one of the areas, like I said, that kind of was routinely coming up the last couple of days. I think, there was other conversations around, just kind of the differences in individualized experiences. So kind of, those who felt like they were positively impacted by the climate of our community versus those who didn't, where that was different faculty versus students. So kind of, I think, Jerry, you made the comment earlier about, it seeming like students were maybe more positive than faculty, that kind of thing. So we definitely talked through some of that as well. I think another area we also focused on some was this idea around reporting and, folks, knowing where to report, how to report, and not necessarily the feeling that the resources don't exist, but not necessarily knowing how to navigate. And so an interesting thing about that is it really brought forward, again, this idea of communication. And that was one of the things that we feel really carries from phase 1 to phase 4 is how do we continually become more creative and innovative in how we communicate about things? How do we make sure that we're, trying to reach students from multiple avenues so that way they really know what's available to them? How do we make sure that we're kind of meeting folks where they are? And we're not just kind of emailing and emailing and emailing. And so we haven't figured that out in this last 2 years, at least not perfectly yet. But I think we've covered, a lot of ground, and it was not surprising to see that to continue to be something that we need to continue to work on. I think I don't know anyone who feels like they communicate perfectly all of the time. So when you've got the whole university and thousands of students, it is quite okay that we're not perfect yet, and we'll definitely make some improvements. I think the last thing that I'll share for now, and then I welcome any questions or things like that, is, the report was incredibly constructive. There was definitely some big pieces of what some might take as quite criticism, but I think it's just really high quality feedback that gives us a lot of growth potential and a lot of learning. And I know it can be like for some, it can feel quite heavy, right? Because you're like, oh, we sat in this session for like an hour and we're told, you can do all of these things better. And the truth is that we can, right? We do know that we have lots of growth potential. I came to Western feeling like there was so much growth potential as a full university. It's one of the things that attracted me to this place. And I feel like from phase 1 to phase 4, I could see some of that already, right? Like some of the areas I was like, oh, like access to technology. Well, we doubled the technology like checkout for Chromebooks in the library since this happened, so there's these pieces where I can be like, yes, we've started working on that. And then other pieces where I'm like, we've still got a ways to go and we're going to do it. So I felt a lot of, even though there's a lot of criticism, even though there's a lot of feedback that some may feel is, quite negative, it's so much growth potential for us that I'm really excited about. And then I do want to say, I also appreciated that Jordan shared with us on Tuesday a list of some of the most effective programs at WOU in regard to specifically diversity, equity, and inclusion. And she had shared with us some of the items that had come up multiple times, and so it's always great to kind of see some wonderful resources within our community, like Multicultural Student Services, also their student union, right? Abby's House, Veterans, Stitch Closet, et cetera. And it's really great to be able to celebrate and encourage those areas that, we know everyone on campus is working pretty hard, but I appreciate the ability that she took the time out to make sure that in addition to all the feedback, it was also like, hey, look, these folks are getting spotlighted over and over again. And so that's always really exciting to be able to kind of spend a little bit of time in celebration of some of our folks. And so that's kind of just some, 3 or 4 things I thought I would highlight with y'all, but we can talk through anything that you would like. And if I don't have an immediate answer, we can definitely get it. And like I said, we will have access to the presentation edited. The non-edited presentation already exists in Portal. You could look at it right now, but it will get updated when she sends me the new draft. And then I'll add the report when she sends that to me. And so those will be available. And then once our video from Tuesday is captioned and ready to go, we'll have that posted as well. Questions?
Thank you, Dominique. I just wanted to, I don't have a question, but I had a couple of, I was there, I got to see a couple of it. So I wrote, looking through my notes, I took a bunch of notes and I could not keep up, right? But one of the things that continued to be echo was that whole basic needs, right, of our students. And one thing that I did like that she brought up also as a potential resource is USC's Department of Basic Needs. I know we may not have that type of funding, but that doesn't mean we can't glean stuff on where we could potentially do better, right? So that was one of the things that I wanted to highlight, that is that I really like that she tried also offering some resources. And I hope that with her final report, there might be some more resources embedded. Two other things was the difference between feeling safe, the physical safe, and feeling safe, right? If you're neurodivergent, what to do with that, the hot topics, right? She brought that up as well. And again, I think that comes back to communications and or procedure and understanding what we're supposed to do in certain situations while we're on campus. The last one that I did like is this was comprehensive, but what didn't we do by focusing on these things? Where didn't we focus? And I love that she pointed out that next time it would be good to do the same survey with families and alumni, which I thought, or incorporating their voices into that. And I just thought that's an awesome opportunity as we continue to monitor ourselves and check ourselves as we move forward with some of our goals. But I'll open it up to the group. And does anybody else want to share? Were they those that were present, those that weren't, those that have read it? Anybody would like to share thoughts on what they read? Go ahead, Viviana.
Yeah, I was also there in person. It was a very good presentation. I think Dr. Shelby West brought up many things that I've been thinking as a student. So it was nice to hear those echoed by a professional. And then I totally agree with you, Dominique, that it should be looked at not as what we're doing wrong, but as how we can improve, which I think is very important. Oh gosh, I lost my train of thought. She went away. That's all. If I remember, I'll say it.
Perfect. Thank you. Does anybody else want to share? President Peters, it
I'm
looks like.
sure. When she came to the senior leadership meeting, it was really a facilitated conversation about next steps and strategies and our reactions, which was really good. I think a challenge for the committee that Dominique talked about standing up will be, how do you prioritize actions? Because you can look through the data slides and look at lots of things that feel really important, but we're small with finite resources and we can't do it all. And we certainly can't do it all fast. So, there are things like professional development opportunities and ways to advance at this university. That was something that employees said they don't feel like there's a good route. So that's one thing that we might need to really delve into. Then at the same time, you have students who are saying they feel like they can engage in conversations in class, but they don't feel comfortable bringing up political topics. So that takes some time to look at. What do they mean by that? And how are we providing an environment where the plurality of ideas can be openly discussed, right? So academic affairs will probably have to delve into that a little bit and have some conversations with faculty. But I could go on and on and on, right? Every time I see a data point, or I'm like, why would someone say that, and what does it really mean? So we will have to get some priorities in hand as we go forward. But I also am happy now we have a strategic plan that we can say, well, how does this put students at the center, for example? How does this reinforce community? And then we can maybe use that as a lens for prioritization. So I was happy to see it. It's I've said this in many venues, but the thing that's admirable about the people who work here, and the students as well, I think, is that people really don't get too defensive about it. I mean, they don't say this is wrong, or why would you say that, or yes, you can say what you think about politics. I do think that by and large, they feel it and want it to be better. So I think the reaction primarily when Dr. West comes here is like sadness, because people are upset that people would experience a negative thing in our community. So that gives me a great deal of hope to get the work done and to join in other people trying to do the hard work. So.
Thank you for sharing. Trustee Romero, did you have a follow-up, or did you remember your last point?
I remembered and I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget. The part that made me the saddest was the faculty respondents, how a majority of our faculty are feeling that they are having a negative experience because of our climate. That was very shocking to me, and a few other professional staffs I had conversations with about the climate survey, that at other schools, it's really more that the faculty is happier than the staff, rather than here we have the staff happier than the faculty. So that part really broke my heart, because as a student, we're mainly here to learn, and we can't learn like without our staff, but also without our faculty. So that really broke my heart. And then I also wanted to say that as a student, I think it's awesome that our majority of our experiences were on the more positive end. However, I do want to acknowledge and highlight that I think a lot of the students who are more likely to participate in these surveys are the students similar to me who have had more positive experiences here at WOU. And so I just also want to acknowledge that although the students are really leaning more on the positive end, I do think that a lot of the students who didn't complete it would probably lean more towards the negative end. So I think it's good that we are focusing on centering students. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. I agree. I think that, I echo that. I also echo what President Peter shared, right? There's so much where we could do a lot of, like Dominique said, also a lot of these things we're being told where we could improve, and it breaks your heart, right? Because our perceptions of reality may be different based on our lived experience, right? At engaging the community at WU, if we were an alumni, whatever the case may be. But at the same time, there's so many opportunities. How do we create an appropriate timeline, right? How do we set the right money aside? Because a lot of this training, professional development, training people up and whatnot, a lot of these, there's true financial figures that it does. It takes resources to make these things happen. So I think this committee work is going to be super important. I think it's going to be very important for board members to take this with the whole entire landscape, right, of the university through a lot of our lens. Not always are we using our DEI lens to make decisions. Sometimes we have to make decisions based on our financial lens or whatever lens we're putting on at that moment, right, as seeing the global landscape of the university and as board members. But I do feel there's a lot of information here, and I think some of the stuff we're doing already, but like as Dominique said, some of it we could do better. And there's some things that we're just not doing that maybe a starting point is where we need to engage and truly learn from that as we continue to go through that process. But thank you for sharing also, Trustee Romero. I think that's stupid getting it's smart getting the view of a student actively at the university and seeing what you're seeing from your perspective. And so I think that's super important. Is there others that would like to share? Go ahead, Trustee Jackson.
Thank you. I was on vacation, so I missed the presentation, and I'm excited to watch the recording when it posts. But I'm curious, I'm looking at like the difference between faculty and staff responses in my department unit. And then the scores are so much lower at the university level. I'm wondering if this was something that Dr. Jordan Shelby West like addressed in the talk, or has like any type of hypothesis around like, I don't know. I don't even want to call it like factionalism, but like it just really seems like folks are feeling a lot more supported in their little enclaves, but not necessarily like they're this. I don't understand. I guess what I'm struggling with personally is like, why do you feel respected by your supervisor in your unit, but then presumably your same supervisor is not as supportive, like in a different context? I guess I just don't quite understand.
Dominique, do you want to speak to that? I know she did make a comment about that. She just, I guess, and you summarized it, Paige, what Dr. West, if I understood correctly, said that people do feel a lot more supported, heard, valued within their departments and teams. But then when they go to the university level, there's this gap where they're not feeling as valued or as heard or as seen. And again, we kept the conversations at a higher level. I'm sure that when we extrapolate, maybe some of that will come to light as to the whys, because it, again, not being a data person myself, hearing that, I felt like there was a direct conflict. Like, wait, how do you feel this here? But then is it senior leadership, right? I started projecting, right? What would this look like? And I'm hoping that some of the data collection, when we dive into it, will show some of that. Dominique, do you want to speak to that at all, or thoughts on that?
How you shared is how I recall the specific conversation as well. Because she did reflect, and we actually went back and forth on the two specific slides about like in my department unit, I feel, versus then the next slide is in the university, I feel. And she did kind of go back and forth a couple times so we could see that shift. And she didn't, say, here's the exact reason why this is happening. But I do think it does get further contextualized in the report that we'll get to see soon. But there is there's a couple of questions I always wonder too, like, Jerry, you just brought up senior leadership. And I think something that we think about is when folks view, the university, that gets at like, well, who is the university? What is the university? When we talk about administration, like who do people view as administration versus not administration? And so my hope is when we read through the report more thoroughly and can, all kind of share through that, that'll kind of help us get a better picture, because I do think sometimes we don't always have a definition of like what we mean by administration is is cabinet or something, right? And so I think sometimes it's hard to know the exact specifics of that. But she said that there was, hundreds of qualitative data responses, and she just highlighted a few of them in this, and then more are highlighted in the full report.
So I have a theory, Jerry.
Go ahead.
Talked a little bit about it this week with the leadership team, and I'm curious about Vivi and Paige's reactions to this theory. I think some of it could be, if you think about sort of the way that I am as the symbol of the school, and the way that I push the team to be, which is accessible and collaborative. And I think by and large, people have that perception. But then if they don't get to interact with us much, it feels like, well, you're really accessible, but not to me, right? It's like I don't see you much. And like, Paige and I don't see each other much, for sure. But so I don't know. I mean, I guess it's a strength and a weakness, right? Sometimes your strength is your weakness. Like we're going to endeavor to be a real part of the community that operates as genuine people with each other. But then when we're spread thin, we get busy, and then it seems like we are not around, maybe, or I don't go to everybody's stuff as much as I try to go to things. And so maybe that's part of it. I don't know, but it's something for us to think about, even if that's wrong. It's like, how are we being present in a way that feels like we're valuing people as much as we want and think we are?
Thank you for sharing that. That makes sense. Yeah, I thought about that as well, right, on how that could look and whys. And I think that's kind of where I ended before I say, oh, you know what, we're going to jump into the data points. That's kind of what I was thinking. President Peters is that you may be very visible, but it's to the who and when, and then how do I feel specifically, right? So I think that's fair. I had one other last clarification that I'd like to ask, but uh, Trustee Vu, do you have any thoughts, comments? Have you even had a chance to extrapolate any of it? I just wanted to check in.
Well, I think it was going about that visibility and being seen. I remember our last board meeting, what we emphasized is the student experience is that we're meeting you where you're at. Is that physically, emotionally, in a communication cycle? When I think about it, is the expectation that I guess our individuals within the staff and faculty saying, my department sees me, but the university doesn't see me. And that's what I don't understand. I'm so new to this all, in terms of that climate. And then with Dr. West bringing in, talking about alumni and, community and family, that goes along with it. My question is, where do we draw that line? I mean, where's our focus point? It's kind of the, in terms of like that target. In my mind, we've been very focused on the student and the student experience, and then alumni, community members may not be in that center of the target because it's not our direct impact. And then so reverse that is the expectation that the board and the admin are just omnipresent. And I don't know if that doesn't seem right to me. So for me, that's a disconnect. I'm trying to put those pieces together. So clarification of seeing, C being seen without being a big brother. I mean, it's a Venn diagram there that I don't understand what expectations are and what's realistic.
And somebody please jump in, but I think the way I understood that, at least a little clarification that I got, Trustee Vu, was that when she was describing the experience and some of the family tie-ins, some of our students had, they need childcare, they have these other time limitations, work and whatnot. And so I think the context of trying to figure out the families, and it's still centered around the student, but how that student then, what they all have going around, and how that student is a whole student, not just in the classroom. What are the other barriers from basic needs, childcare, where they're sleeping, all of those things, and how does that impact our students when they're on campus? Is the way I kind of took it. Dominique, Dr. Peters, somebody else,
Well,
Vivian, there, yeah.
for that accessibility part that Jim brought up, let's look at it from a trustee point of view. So people would say the trustees aren't accessible, right? A lot of people have this comment like we don't, but the truth is you're more accessible than any other board of trustees in the system, I assure you, which I think is great. So what are we doing wrong? Like, is it just that coffee time? Like the students aren't going to get up at 8 o'clock and talk to y'all in the morning for coffee, or the reception feels too formal. Is it, better for, let's just say you guys walk around with someone, guide you and drop in on some classes or something. I mean, I don't know what it is, but there's a thirst to interact with you as human beings. And we think we're doing it, but then people say we're not doing it. And I know you can't please everybody, but I think we want to be more innovative.
Thank you for sharing that. I know we tried to answer that by doing a 2-day meeting and whatnot. So I know it's there. I've heard this. It's been a common theme. Trustee Romero.
Yeah, I can speak from the student's perspective. So before I actually became a trustee, I did get to interact with last year's Board of Trustees as I was the incidental fee chair, and I got to come to a reception, which was very nice. I can say from a student's perspective, it's very intimidating going in. Oftentimes, we're expecting to be the youngest in the room, and I have not, luckily, like everybody who I've interacted with in this environment has treated me with the same respect that they treat others. So I have not experienced being put down because I'm younger, which I really appreciate. But that's definitely a big fear we have. And then you said it exactly, President Peters. We're not getting up at 8 in the morning to come have coffee with you guys. I didn't even really do that this last term. I think something later in the day would be a lot better, like instead of doing the coffee chat in the morning, or or keeping the coffee chat, but also doing a dinner or at night that's different than our reception, like on the big public day meeting, like on that Wednesday we usually have meetings, would be, I think, a better way to get more students involved. And then also more advertisement. I know before I became a trustee, I didn't realize that we could come in on these meetings and say our pieces and say things. And that's also just from a lack of me before not wanting to read emails. But I think more advertising, as well as I know me and Trustee Showalter bring it up often in classes that we are on the Board of Trustees to try to make ourselves more visible. But yeah, we're just not going to get up that early to get coffee.
Thank you for sharing. That makes sense. Even as a student from my own experience, I didn't know I could go interact with the Board of Trustees and that I could go into these meetings. And two, I don't even know that I would, because I'd be so intimidated. So those are all very fair. Okay, so the other one that I wanted to bring up that I wasn't sure about, and maybe I completely missed it here. She mentioned something about the VP and the structure of where we have the Office of DEI. Is that correct? Are we talking about specifically Dominique's position as the executive director versus a VP, and that we're the only institution not doing a VP position structure? Can somebody describe that to me? Because I feel like I'm missing it.
I can. Can I also, though, go back to something that Trustee Vu said a second ago? I will answer your question, though, Jerry. I promise I won't forget.
Go ahead.
But I did want to reflect, Trustee Vu, part of the alumni piece and part of the family piece was also about how we engage with alumni and family. So like, for example, some of the student feedback in the survey talked about wanting more opportunities to engage with alumni. So not necessarily like, do we need to like survey alumni, I guess, but to like, how can we build up that network more, and how can we bring alumni in and do some different things? So because students kind of seem to crave that opportunity. How do we partner more with like alumni businesses for internships, those kinds of, so it was kind of like, that was one of the parts of the alumni piece, was like, how do we increase that engagement for our alumni with our students, so that way that we can have kind of co-learning opportunities and that kind of thing. And then the family piece too, I think a piece of that that's come up a few times, not just in this portion of, you know, this survey, one thing that she talked about, Dr. West talked about specifically, was, you know, kind of the invitation that if you are a caregiver, you know, that they know that they can bring whoever it is they care for with them to an activity or an event, right? Like, I would come to this if I felt I could bring my child or my brother or whoever it is that I, you know, help caregive for. And then also there's been some discussion around how we inform like support networks of different things. So, you know, especially for first generation students, something that's come up is very often, you know, support networks don't necessarily know how to do FAFSA, know how to do these things. And so what supports do we offer to support networks, and not just for the student? Because oftentimes you have a student who's trying to kind of talk their parent through how to do something when a student's learning how to do that as well. So I just wanted to contextualize that piece a little bit more, Trustee Vu, so you would know kind of some of the big picture there. Did you want to say something before I?
Well, just looking at that inside that connection standpoint, I mean, I think a lot of it is what I'm hearing from that is just creating an environment where people and their circle feel that it's like it's safe and it's welcoming.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I take away from that.
Yes.
Going back a little bit about the access point, my experience from a business world is that no matter what time you place a meeting, if the person sees value in that interaction or that meeting, they will prioritize it.
Mhm.
Everybody's busy for things they don't want to do. And but if it's a priority, you fit it in, you make it valuable. So that's something that I think about it. If the expectation is from a trustee standpoint or leadership standpoint, if we have those coffees, but setting up one-on-ones, get to know you. It's like a parallel that I look about that. It's kind of the human library aspect where you can go and hear the story and going through. And maybe part of that is that students that say, I want to be seen, I want to go through. I would love to schedule, an appointment with somebody that says, I want you, do you see me? And as a trustee, yes, I would like to, and create an environment that would be welcoming toward that. So we can hear the voices, hear through. We can't create an environment of, we're focused, WOU is focused on one of one. We can't have that side of it, but be able to create a voice so that people feel that there is a voice, they can be seen, they can get heard, and it's encouraged, not to just go through kind of a dog and pony show. We're here to actually listen. And
Yeah.
for me, that would be I consider myself to be an extremely unintimidating person. Good Lord. I mean, I'm surprised I'm an adult right now. So it's just
Our view of ourselves sometimes though is different than, others' views of us.
Sure. Before Dominique goes to answer the chair's question, Chair, can I speak to one more thing there?
Most definitely.
Thank you. Going back to the recognition and really feeling appreciated um, at the division or unit level and not the administration. I think some of that we'll see in extrapolating the detail is recognition. I think we struggle at a university level sometimes with recognition of the work being done. And I see it's kind of like government in general. The more local the government, the more directly you're impacted, right? The more local the folks around you, you have a more of a support system. You go to lunch, you do like white elephant gifts, you do those kind of things. We don't we struggle sometimes with the recognition of the service that the larger university does. And I think that is some of what we're hearing there. And then to the point about the trustees, I think some of the feedback I've gotten in the last couple of days from since Dr. West's presentation is a lot about, all right, let's break out those invitations for the extra curricular events as part of the board and advertise separately. Work with marketing communication, advertise coffee, advertise the reception or whatever else we choose to do, and make sure it's tailored to using language that might attract student participation, right? Instead of like, oh, join us for coffee to meet some of our board members, like explain what the board does, invite them, make sure it's welcoming. So I'm gonna, working with the president on it and marketing communication, we'll come up with a strategy to do better on that because I think we can own that, and I think that's a low cost thing to fix. And if it increases participation, it only benefits. So thank you for letting me go down that rabbit hole a little bit.
No, I agree, Evan. I think that's solid. That's solid feedback that, our messaging plays a role, especially I think to our students. And, when they're competing, when their time is competing for so many things to get done, needs, wants, right? I think if we want more participation, having a strategy around our communications and how we frame the message, I think is super important. Okay, Dominique, we'll go back to you.
In for your question. Yes. So the piece that you asked about was the vice president piece. And yes, so basically what has occurred honestly, this is just I'm just going to give you the full context outside of Dr. West's presentation as well, so you know where I think that this comes from. So yes, so her recommendation, thought, whatever you want to call it, was the idea of elevating, this position, this office within the community. And some of that was stemmed from the fact that in terms of the public universities in Oregon, that this role at this university is an executive director versus the other public universities where it's either an AVP or a VP role. However, I think another piece to contextualize that is some of that is brand new. I was, until this month, was in alignment with several of my peers. Some things have changed over time, and their titles have, changed with promotion and things like that within their university. So that's actually something new. It's not an area, and this is just me sharing from me, it's not an area that I've at all been concerned with. Within the university and within our structure and in our system. But that is what she was referring to, was kind of, our level of commitment and engagement. Is it, matching with our partners in the state?
Thank you for clarifying that. I just wasn't sure on the structure, so it would be elevating it then. And so I guess that's what I was just trying to get at. In the structure, is it just different? If it's a promotion, an elevation, I guess, of how it's structured. So that makes sense to me.
Yeah. So her basic recommendation, in my opinion, and I need to, I didn't take a deep dive or anything, but is that she would like us to be, she recommends that we would be in alignment with the other universities.
Perfect. And thank you for sharing the context of that, because I don't know that she made it as a statement or I think she did make it as a recommendation, but I think she was trying to make a statement of we're the only ones who are not doing that. But the context of that is that it's new. So that also that's very helpful, that we're not lagging behind, you know what I mean? I don't know.
Right. Like 3 weeks ago, I was not the only executive director. This is brand new. And that's how new the report is, right? I mean, this is, been in development until, she sent it the first time this week. So.
Perfect. That makes sense. Go ahead, Trustee Romero.
Yeah, I wanted to see if we could shift the conversation towards accessibility, just because that is a part of our committee. And I also wanted to highlight that I was rather shocked that there wasn't more statements or data points on accessibility. I know that I see that the disability sessions were highlighted, and those are very important. And a comment that I've heard from one of those sessions was that Western Oregon University is ADA compliable, but that doesn't make it accessible. And so I think that we should focus more in on that accessibility aspect. Just even though we are ADA compliant, that doesn't mean it is the most accessible. I like my freshman year, I was in a wheelchair for a week because I twisted an ankle and I could not get around anywhere. And that was just a week for me. So the fact that like my week is other people's whole lives, I think we should be working more towards making it a more accessible place.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you. Anything else before we move on to our interests? The last item that we have on our agenda. Anything else? Go ahead, Dominique. It sounds
Just
like
maybe a word of like, I know I said yes a minute ago, but I just want to be very clear to Trustee Romero that this is definitely an area that rings true to me. You can probably ask a couple of others in this space that this is something that I'm always like, but wait. So anyway, I just say that please trust that, you know, phase one definitely showed accessibility as an area of concern, and that's what led to, you know, one of our equity assessment, you know, action items kind of being themed in accessibility. And that's how we've gotten, you know, to some of this work around policy and things like that. And then in addition to that, even though it may not seem as prevalent in what's been seen here, like that won't, I just want to ensure you that that won't be going away. And also, you know, with our new strategic plan, one of the, you know, core areas around that was accessibility as well. So we have not figured it out. I will not lie and say, hey, tomorrow everything's going to be better. But please know that just because it wasn't necessarily highlighted in this presentation, that by no means will go by the wayside. It has been a theme since phase one, and it will remain so as we kind of make these next steps. So.
Yeah.
perfect. Thank you, Dominique. Great. Then if there's no other thoughts or whatnot on that topic, on the climate survey findings and report, I'll move us on to the interests of our committee members for this academic year when it comes to the work that we're engaging and doing. What are some of the interests? I know we kind of briefly talked about it at the last meeting, kind of just bringing up the topic, something for us to think about. There's a lot of data, a lot of reports, our strategic plan, our goals and whatnot. So what are some of the interests? Have folks had a chance to think about this? Paige, Trustee Jackson?
This is not like a fully baked thought, but I feel like kind of like a consistent thing I run up against that I think a lot of people run up against is that there's so much work to be done that it's often like hard to dig in and know where to start. So, and I don't think the role of this committee is to determine what work needs to be prioritized by any means, but I'm almost wondering if there's any type of guidance or leadership around like the criteria by which you might prioritize something, knowing that like our budget situation is not like we have money to just throw at everything, you know? And then just people's time, and what I think we're seeing from the, you know, feedback is that a lot of folks, well, I guess there's a few voices in there that are like, I don't have enough work to do. And I'm like, who are you people? And let's be friends. First of all, but second of all, like, I think most folks are feeling strapped for like time and effort. So in the context of all of that, and knowing that there's important initiatives that we need to move forward, I just wonder if there's any role that this committee could play in strategically prioritizing things, whether that's resource allocation, time, money. Yeah, and I don't even know if that would be helpful to Dominique, but that's where my mind goes, because this is like a whole pile of things we have to work on, and we can't, if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority.
Thank you for sharing that. Some of the things that I was thinking of is to echo Paige, what you're saying is that I agree with all that. I guess my thing is, where are we, and I know Dominique's going to do this, and maybe our senior leadership, maybe we will, but where's their commonality? Where's their overlap, right? And if it's multiple voices from different areas, I think maybe, I don't know, again, not fully baked thought, but trying to think of, is that maybe some of the things that we start to look at is where resources could be used, you know, more efficiently, and also cover multiple things from different areas, different work that needs to happen. But again, maybe there is an overlap. Maybe all of this is just super expensive. I don't know. But Dominique, I know you might have a thought towards that.
No, I think that this is a good conversation. And what I will say is, when you weren't necessarily asking for an example, but I'll provide you an example anyway. When we were building the action plan, the initial action plan, we did get into the weeds of like creating this big Excel spreadsheet that was like, okay, so these things cost like, kind of like what's the highest commitment of people resources, financial resource, like we had like this full chart that was like, okay, so how do we decide, and things that were like high everything, we're probably like, nope, sorry, we're going to push that to the side. It's not even going to make it to the list, versus things that were kind of like more in the middle, like anything that was like low people, low cost, direct impact on students. It was like, yep, we're going to do that tomorrow. And that's going to become, and so I imagine, and we'll need to do this on a different scale probably this time, but we'll do similar, right? Like when we're making recommendations, doing some things, coming to senior leadership cabinet, et cetera, wherever, all the places we end up going as we have discussions and try to decide next steps, is we will have to look at that, right? Like what is the people power, financial power, et cetera, whatever is needed to make these things happen. And really, a priority for us last time was that like impact on students, and then secondary to that was impact on employees, right? Because again, students at the center, but that doesn't mean we forget about our employee impact. And so that's how we kind of did it last time. It was a very convoluted Excel spreadsheet that did all of these things, and then somehow we got where we are now with so much work. And the good thing is, to someone's point, we have started some of these things already. So like, for example, a lot of what came up was around like pay equity. And of course, we've been engaging in a compensation, that's not the right name of it, but this pay and compensation study for the last, year. And that's been funded luckily through sustainability funds and, these different things. And things like our banner optimization work are definitely part of the technology pieces of this, So the good news is some of this is actually underway. We just haven't necessarily felt the impact to see a survey represent that yet either, right? So I think part of the conversation is also, what does this show that we should absolutely keep doing, not even add, right? But what does this show we should absolutely keep doing? What does this show we should potentially stop doing? I know people get worried about that sometimes, like stopping doing something. What should we potentially stop doing? And then, yes, what should we potentially add in, right? But not to duplicate services and things that we already do. How do we grow on what we've already gotten, that kind of thing. So there'll definitely be, it won't be like a formula, but there will be a formula developed to help with some of that decisions.
Thank you, Dominique. I'll share some of, I guess, my interests for what I'd like to tackle this next year. Is we have spaces, right? I guess is the theme. We have a lot of spaces on our, and what I mean by spaces is like dining halls, right? Some might be empty. We have the coffee shop at the library. We have housing. We have, and when I think about the food, right? I guess what I was kind of hearing is that we may have something at the Warner Center, the grill, or whatever the case may be. I forget the last thing that was there and what it was named, but maybe those prices are too expensive and maybe it's a different type of food, right? So just thinking about all of our spaces, our housing that's not being fully used since the pandemic, thinking about the library, having that coffee shop that some money was invested into, but now it's just sitting there. Could that be transformed? I guess I'm just thinking the Freedom Center. I'm thinking of spaces, the Welcome Center, right? Thinking of spaces, we have a lot of physical assets on campus, and how can we, and then I heard Dr. West bring up affinity spaces, right? So just when I think about spaces on campus, we have a lot of resources in brick and mortar, physical. How can we better utilize those to make it advantageous? And so it's not just another maintenance brick and building that we're trying to spend money on to maintain and keep. I don't know. And I know this is something that President Peters, I know you've gone in circles around on this. I get excited every time I think of what do we do with this housing, or what about that coffee shop at Hammersley Library? And then they're not working, right? And so if I'm not a student there, but I see this just from a standpoint of efficiencies, and it's just like, I wonder what they're doing there, or why did that shut down? So that's kind of one of my interests, is that we have a lot of spaces on campus. How are we utilizing them, and what's the best way to utilize them so that it's not sucking financial resources and students are getting more of what they need, with some of this overlapping of we need, this isn't here. I don't know, trying to figure out something. So that's just my idea. Anybody else? Does anybody else want to share some ideas or what their interests are for this academic year for our committee?
I I think one of the things that we heard in the equity report was a lot about access, and access gets really complicated really quick for a number of reasons. Um, so it might be nice to talk about some of the digital access stuff and break it down, right? So like access can mean a lot of things, right? Digital access is way different than access, like bathroom access versus general access in some of these really old buildings we have, right? So like it could be a way to help inform the campus community and inform the work that's being done when we're talking about such a broad topic such as access. So we're doing things like in more meetings now than ever before since I've been here, we have microphones present, right? Like these are access things. Those are low-hanging fruits that we could see that we're doing it. But a lot of the stuff gets really hard because of capital costs, right? And so having those conversations, I think, might be helpful to really inform the board, inform the campus about like what are we how are we prioritizing, how we're looking at these things, what makes sense, what are standards, like all that stuff, right, Dominic? Like we've had those conversations, of like, some of the action items that I'm responsible for, it's like, whoa, like what can be a uh, gender neutral bathroom space in a current building that was built in 1950 versus the Student Success Center are very different conversations, right? So
Yeah,
Thank you for sharing
I
that.
don't know if there's, I don't know what the appropriateness of this would be or not, so please let me know because I'm not sure. But if there is an interest in a conversation around accessibility and things like that, I know some of us are obviously in the day-to-day here, but I wonder if, if it's of interest to the committee, we could always invite, like folks that work with our HR accommodations or that work with our disability access services, to share some of the things, that the great work that they've been doing within our community to kind of, and give maybe also some contextualization to some of the things that we have heard come up. I don't know if that's the right avenue for this group or not. I'm not really sure what's appropriate or inappropriate, but we could maybe learn some more as this group, since y'all have expressed interest in this area. We can maybe have a little bit of an educational opportunity in terms of what HR offers and what terms of what DAS offers and where they kind of maybe see some need points. And so that might be a good place of reflection and learning. And, similar to what everyone said, we don't necessarily have the resources to suddenly they say, oh yeah, we need 6 new elevators. Obviously, that's not, something that's manageable or feasible for us. But if we think that's an appropriate use of some of our time, we learn from folks all the time. And so I think continuing to learn and grow and kind of get a perspective from folks who are working within that realm with us every day. By no means do they claim to be experts in all areas, but they're going to know, like how are students immediately impacted, how are employees immediately impacted, where are some of those pain points and things like that. So if we feel like that's worth the committee's time, that might be a good idea.
Thank you. One of the other things that I thought of too during the presentation was when we were talking about safety and, one thing it being an active shooter versus, a different type of safety. One of the things, thinking about our buildings and us being an older university, as Evan said, a building built, turn of the century versus a brand new building. When we think about that physical safety in an active shooter, safety plans, right? If we're in a building where there's stairs everywhere and someone's in a wheelchair, what is a safety plan that includes everybody, right? In something like that. And would a professor know if it's there and it's happening would they know that, right? So it comes down to all of that and the challenges of just having a university that's older and newer, right? With newer buildings and older buildings. But just all of that, I guess, when it comes to accessibility, when it comes to being able-bodied versus not, what do those plans and ideas and or thought processes look like when we're taking our campus as a whole when it comes to safety? So I don't know. Another thing that I had thought of with there's so much going on this campus. It's literally a city that you guys are trying to run, and it's tough, right? It's tough to manage. Dominique, go ahead, Dr.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jim. Go.
No, go ahead. I can wait.
I was just going to say, you know, for me, in some ways, the discussions that come through this committee are arguably some of the most important that we have, based on who we are as an institution and what we're trying to do. And we've been doing some thinking lately about, well, what are we really trying to do, right? We've articulated some things and we see ourselves in a particular way, but I think we ought to push into how can we do some innovative things. Sometimes I'm reminded, Jerry, about your story of admissions going to your home. And Paige, I'm not saying we need to do this immediately, but I mean, it was an innovative thing way back then. You know, it's sort of, how do we put resources into being the school who does things like this and has a system for doing it? You know, I was thinking, I was been texting Tina on the side. It's like, well, what if we were a school where students have free housing and food here if they lived on campus? So just so you know, that's about $11.5 million we would need to do that per year extra. But it's not worth throwing out the window because it's that much money. I mean, maybe we need to think about, well, how do we become a place that really is trying to live the rhetoric we're putting forward? And so anyway, that's what I take your wisdom and guidance and, you know, pushing us to try to get innovative a little bit. And even if it's a small thing, it might make a lot of difference. So sorry, and I cut Jim off when I started that.
Well, no, it actually aligns with what I want to kind of talk about is, you know, you look at what you're investing in ROI. I think as, you know, a role as a board of trustee as well as within this committee is that we have to ask ourselves what the value proposition is of the student we're attracting. And in terms of, we can't be everything to everybody, but recognizing who we're trying to be. And, you know, I think the two things that have really come across to me is first time, you know, college students. I think also from the, you know, our accreditation through HIS, looking at what that draw is going to be. And, you know, from a DEI standpoint, being able to focus that lens of let's not confuse activity with productivity. And, you know, I think the core values that we as a university are saying are that we want to see you as a student and whatever that means. So just recognizing like if higher education is a goal of yours, how do we reach out? And you know, a lot of these surveys and things that we're looking at, the confirmation bias is that the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So there are students that aren't choosing Western. There are students that are leaving the university without completing with the degree. And I think, you know, true numbers is what's our retention and graduation rate, and students that walk away from this saying the investment that I made in myself and the investment that Western made in me, I'm a better person for it. So in terms of those measurables and looking at it is, okay, if we had every elevator we wanted, we had every ramp that we needed, we had microphones everywhere, um, is that going to create the environment and the climate that's going to draw the student that we want and that wants to be here? So I guess that type of lens and criteria is absolutely difficult to measure, but I think for us to understand retention of the students that are here and that aren't completing, what are those barriers to it? And I think that focus point is, so what if we look at it from a standpoint of housing vouchers, working with our local communities to be able to supplement, we fix up and spend time in those housing and feeding, you know, the food services, that it may not be 11 million, but what if it's $1 million, so that that looks at, you know, 50 students that gets through 4 years of college, and that builds it out so that there are other services that are trying to complement not just within the university, but the symbiotic relationships within the community, so that we build our relationships so these students are deciding between, Chemeketa, Trade, Western, Oregon State. What are they looking at? And, just figuring out there is that the bait you use is the fish you catch. So what bait do we have out there? And does that differentiate from, I guess I wouldn't say competition, but somebody looking for higher ed? How do we get there? How do we understand those needs instead of just focusing in on taking care of the ones or understanding the needs of the ones that are already here? I think in terms of growth for the university, we've got to hear and listen to the people that aren't here.
Thank you, Trustee WOU, for sharing that. And I love the way it's tied in. And, and we keep repeating what Dominique says. We can't be everybody. We can't be everything to everybody. And I love the way you put that, because what are we trying to be and to who, right? Because that's what it's coming down to. And with that, I think it's once we can identify of the what and to the who, yeah, will microphones solve that, right? And if it's not, that's not going to solve the issue that we're trying to figure out here, right? I like the idea that President Peters put out about housing vouchers. We understand that we're a university that has first generation students, low income students. We understand that HSI, right? With that, we understand that food insecurity is huge without just taking the higher education out of it, just in general from a basic needs, housing, food, right? All of that. And if that is the who we're trying to cater to and to be a part of, then we're gonna have to look at that voucher system or that whole approach. And I love that if we're doing it for everybody, yeah, it might be $1 million, but if there's an equitable sliding scale of trying to identify who has the biggest need first and working backwards, maybe like Jim says, we start with the million, and someday with admissions and everything growing, people do start coming here because of who we are and what we are. Maybe it grows to 2 million, 3 million, and someday we do 11 million, right? But I love how those conversations are happening at your level, Jesse, with senior leadership, and also trying to tie it back into, we can't be everything to everybody, but what are we trying to be into who?
So is that a program we're creating called the Who's at WOU?
Yeah. I was waiting for you to have some type of da-da-da. Love
I was
it.
going to share, we have some actually pretty meaningful data from students who have left Western through our AI chatbot, who does a persistence check-in annually. And I think it ties into the conversation around access, and the results of that data, along with some other points, and a lot of the retention information that we have from years and years and years, that suggests that access really largely, like the ability to access resources at the right time, the systems built out so that you're not relying on one person who knows how to navigate the university for you, has been the cornerstone of all of our retention work for the last 3 years, honestly. Is we have really student-centered people, which is great, but if you don't have student-centered systems, people are going to fall through the cracks. And I think that's what our retention and grad rates reveal, frankly. Anyway, if that's of any interest to anyone, I'm happy to share the results of that. They're really interesting and really far-ranging, but I'll share off the top of my head. I think financial concerns were probably accounted for almost 40 to 50% of the reason why students left. And that's pretty consistent with national data on why students stop out of college as well. So, we're nothing if not consistent.
I love that. And I know President Peters was joking about for admissions going to people's homes, and Paige's look was like, there's no way, right? I don't know what was happening that allowed that, at that time, when, at least through my experience, having SCP, and it was really the multicultural student office, right? MSSP, that it was labeled something else, I think, at the time. But I don't know how they made that happen. I don't know if that was a university initiative, if it was their own personal of, we're gonna do this because we have to. I don't know what it was, but I will say it's highly effective, and that would solve a lot of our problems, but we don't have all that staff in time to do that.
Right. I don't know the answer, and I'm sure Paige will come up with the answer, which is why we hire Paige. But is there a version of that, right? Is there some version of that, whether it's families can schedule a Zoom or they can schedule an appointment, or we're going to go more often into community centers, or with lots of advertising, and this is the time to meet people, and maybe the right people, different people come, odd folks who wouldn't normally go, and they talk to families about things or share stories. Because I really think narrative a lot of college decision making is narrative driven in one way or another, right? Whether it's on Instagram or it's online. But I think families talk about what is college going to be like and who's there, like who's leading it, who's works there, what are the faculty like, what do they teach? And I think the more they get to hear stories like that, the better. So I don't know what the solution is, but I think admissions programs try to attract students by reaching them with things sometimes, or messages or packages of financial aid. But I think we're kind of a narrative place. I don't know what it would be, but I'm interested in any ideas that the folks here come up with to be innovative and try some things. Maybe there's some AI leverage here that can do some things for us too, answer some questions. We like Paige said, we have this chat bot, which gets a very high amount of use. So it's really interesting that connection is something that students are wanting. And I know families do too. They really do.
Paige,
Especially
I would
first
like,
gen families, because they don't know, you know how it is. Many of you are first gen, they don't know what to ask. They're worried about their kids going away. If they know that we're about that's one thing. They're like, okay, but what does that mean? That you're about that. So how do we get that message out and kind of back to what maybe it was Jim who said, meeting them where they are, trying to think about it anyway. Sorry, Vivi.
No, I see Trustee Romero's hand raised. I'll let you go, Trustee Romero, and then Trustee Vu, if you wanted to follow up to Jesse's comment, by all
Yeah,
means.
I was gonna say I have a meeting at 2:30, so I have to go. Thank you guys. I hope y'all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us while you could. Thank you. Have a good day. Trustee Vu, did you want to follow up to that? It sounded like you maybe had a comment to that.
well, I think what Paige was sharing, just the information and understanding. Let's, taking that information of why students aren't, finishing, and what that dies talks about accessibility, and there might be some low hanging fruit, and I think that's just it. I look at it as ROI. If we have limited resources, we've got to focus in on areas. I'd rather do a couple things really well than 50 things really poorly. So if we can figure out, looking at those alignments, how the information from this survey aligns with the existing strategic plan, if there needs to be modifications that go along with it, we take the information and learn from it and evolve. I mean, these are living, breathing documents. Let's give some life to it.
I think it's something I see in higher ed a lot at most institutions. Every institution I've worked at is we're always, to Dominique's point earlier, we're trying to do more and more and be like out here and do the next thing there's no silver bullet, like there just isn't. But one thing that you just said that we've had a lot of success with is like doing less and doing it better. And that's like a mantra in my areas of like we're doing a lot, but like how can we focus in on the core of the work and just like do it better? So far it's yielding good results on the retention side, and we're getting things shored up on the enrollment side as well. But it takes time. But yeah, to your point, like what are the levers we can pull that are going to yield the best ROI in the shortest amount of time? And then that's where we focus our efforts, because if they're everywhere, they're nowhere.
Right. And it's being intentional about that, right? I think there's a lot of things we're doing good and they're just happening by happenstance. They're not like we're doing it because we're focusing, they're just happening. And how do we do those things better, right? Because we are doing a lot. And so I agree with that. How do we focus in and do better with the things that we already got going for us? And we're seeing positive ROI come out of. Was that helpful, Dominique? Was that helpful on, interests of the DEIA committee members for this academic year? I don't know, it was kind of like just a global discussion and kind of just went our own ways. I don't know if that was helpful, Evan, if that was helpful for you.
I got some notes.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. And then Jerry, as we plan for the next meeting and things, we can always choose, if we want to bring in some data or some other individuals to kind of help continue to inform conversations. I think anytime that we ask questions that can be potentially challenging and thought-provoking is always welcome in my book. So I appreciate the discussion today. And even if it's kind of, what do people say, like pie in the sky and maybe we can't do it, but I think it's worth us figuring out truly, what can we do? What can we do well? What are we already doing? What are we already doing well? And, so I appreciate the innovative ideas and the discussion.
I agree. And I think that's where a role of the strategic plan could play, right? If we're going to focus on some of the things, how do we make that a part of the plan so that we're not trying to do a bunch of other things? You know, at least from the strategic plan in my world of small 501(c)(3) is I'll have staff come at me, this is a good idea, this is a good idea. And if they can't tie it back to our strategic initiatives of what we're trying to accomplish, then the answer is, I don't even have to answer it, right? They answer their own question. But if they do find a commonality to achieve that goal, then all of a sudden it's like, yes, do that. You know, why didn't we think of that ahead of time? So I think maybe that in the future could be a potential so that we're not, you know, so that that brings more focus into what are we doing and how are we doing it. Any other, so I know that we have our scheduled time until 3, so I don't want to rush us off. It's 2:30. Or sorry, it's from 1 to 3, right? Is that
So
true?
yeah, so we reserve it from one, like I put a hold on your calendar from 1 to 3 in case we go
Okay.
long. Scheduled till 2:30.
Okay, so we're going a
Um,
little long. Okay. So
yeah.
so to be respectful with people's time then, if there's nothing else, then I will adjourn this meeting. Is there any other thoughts, comments before we adjourn? If not, thank you everybody for joining us and for participating and making it very enlightenful discussion this afternoon. Thank you. Have a wonderful day. And if y'all need anything, contact Dominique, Evan, or President Peters. Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Thank